This is a beginner tutorial video on how to make a scrolling shooter game. Now this does require you to have some basic knowledge of coding, but I'll try to keep it beginner friendly. Now the first thing you ought to do is start a blank project. You'll see the interface, and on the right side is the resource window. A game has images called sprites or textures, and the entities using those sprites or textures are called objects. Now let's create a sprite by pressing the Alt S key. That will open a new sprite window. Let's name this SPR underscore plane. Now you can import your own images, but I'm going to make the plane sprite myself in the sprite editor window. Alright, I can now close this window and move on to making the object. Now press right click in the resource window and from the list select object. Now we can name this obj underscore plane. You have to be mindful about naming your sprites and objects because GameMaker is very case sensitive. You cannot use spaces in between words either. Now, every object has events that execute accordingly. And the most important of these events is the create event, the step event, and the draw event. Now, the create event works when the object is created in the game. It only executes one time. We can just leave this blank as we do not need it right now, or we can just put a comment. Comments are added by two forward slashes, and the game usually ignores these. You can just use them as notes. Now I'll teach you about the step event. It's an event that runs indefinitely, like continuously. Like if your game runs on 30 FPS, then the step event will run 30 times in 1 second. Now what you see here is an if condition. Now this only runs the next line of code if its said condition is true. Otherwise, it just ignores the next line and just moves on. To check for the keys of the keyboard, we use keyboard underscore check. Now this condition will return true if the key we specified in the parentheses is pressed. Just as its description says, with this function you can check to see if a key is held down or not. Now this will continuously run if the key is held down or not. To check for the left key of the keyboard, we use vk underscore left. Now an object has an x and y position in the room of the game, and if we want to move the object in that sense, that means we have to manipulate its x and y positions. So in this case, if we want to move the object to the left, we'll have to decrease its x position. So we put the minus sign before the equal sign. That would decrease the x value by 1 in each step. And vice versa, if I want to move the object to the right, I'll just have to increase its x value. The x refers to the horizontal plane of the object, and the y position refers to the vertical plane of the object. Now let's open up the room, which is the one resource that is necessary to exist for the game to run. Now you'll see a blank room with a grid and a black background. Now we're gonna ignore these two options and change the size of the room. You can change the room size to whatever you like, but I like my room size to be 640 and 480. One thing I completely forgot was to assign a sprite to my object. Okay, now that's all set. Let's place the object in the room. You can drag the object from the resource window and put them in the room. Now in this upper bar, you'll see a lot of options here. And the one most important thing you're gonna do is save your project every time because when an unfortunate shutdown happens, you'll lose all your process. To run the game, you just press the play button and it will take some compiling and run the game. And just like that, you just made an object that moves left and right. Easy, wasn't it? Now I'll do the same for the up and down. I'll also increase the speed. Using the Y for the up and down, just like I said before, the plane used in GameMaker Studio 2 is very different from what you use in real life in mathematics. So the Y axis usually increases as you go up, but in GameMaker it decreases as you go up. The origin of the room is the top left corner, which specifies the position 00. This grid initially has the scale of 32 x 32, and as you would know, the lower right corner of this grid would be the room height and width. The movement of the plane is pretty much done. Now we need to create some bullets. Now I'll create the sprite for the bullet named SPR underscore bullet. Now I'm just gonna trim the image using the auto trim all frames. And now just going to put its origin there. The origin is basically where the X and Y position of the image should be. So if I'm using that image as a sprite for the object, that point is going to be X and Y of the object. That's why for the plane, I want the X and Y position to be the plane's center. Like if I wanted to create a bullet from the object plane, that would be created a little above from the center of the plane. Now we can use the same keyboard check for the bullet, but this time we're actually going to use keyboard check pressed, since the keyboard check is used to check if the key is held down. The keyboard check pressed only checks one time. We don't want to create bullets continuously at each step. We just want the bullet to create only once when the keyboard key is pressed. Now for the space bar, we can use vk underscore space. Now pretty quickly, let's create our bullet object. Let's name it obj underscore bullet. Now in its create event, I'm going to set our vertical speed. These are built-in functions of GameMaker that let us set the vertical and horizontal speed for an object. So for the vertical speed, I'm going to use v speed and set it to a minus value so it decreases the y continuously. I'm gonna set it to 10, or I think I should set it to 5. 5 must be better. Now, objects are also referred as instances in GameMaker. Now, let's create the instance in the room by a function named instance underscore create underscore depth. In the lower bar of this code window, you can actually see what type of argument this function requires. And now, since I'm using this function from the plane object, the x and y would refer to the x and y of the obj plane. So I'm basically creating the bullet from the center of the plane where the plane is in the room. Since the bullet is getting created at the center of the plane, I want it to be created at the tip of the plane. So that means a little bit above from the y position. And since the obj plane is 32 pixels in height, that would mean 16 pixels upwards. So I'm gonna put a minus 16 in the y so the bullet will get created 16 pixels up the plane. The depth usually handles how the sprite is drawn for the plane. Like if an object has less depth, it will be drawn first, then the object which has a higher depth. This is a topic for another time. Depth testing is best used in RPG type games, and since we don't really need it, we're just gonna leave it at 0. Next, we're gonna specify our object that is gonna be created, that is obj underscore bullet. Now, importantly, I want to talk about this semicolon sign. These are not really necessary in GameMaker, but it's a good habit to use them. Plus, most other languages use the semicolon sign, so it'd be better if you use it. Now, let's run the game and test the bullets. Um, oh, stupid me forgot to put the sprite on the object. Okay, testing again, and so yeah, it works. If you were able to follow this far, then congratulations. And do consider subscribing and liking too. So I'd continue making more of these tutorials. Now you can group your sprites and objects. I turned my groups off in the preference. You might have them when you first download GameMaker. So group your sprites and objects accordingly. It saves you the trouble of not looking for your objects and sprite if you have a very big game. Alright, that's it for this tutorial. Now I'm gonna get out of here.